Welcome to the Presilience podcast, Ep.7 with Dr. David Rubens. I'm your host, Joe Saunders. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of the Presilience podcast. Today, I'm joined by Dr. David Rubens, the Executive Director of the Institute of Strategic Risk Management and Managing Director of Deltar Training Systems. He's a chartered security professional and has served 2 terms as the main board director of the UK Security Institute. He holds a doctorate in security and risk management from the University of Portsmouth. He wrote his thesis on strategic management and critical decision-making in hyper-complex crisis environments. The thesis developed models of strategic management at the extremes of organisational complexity, looking at issues of capability development, decision-making and multi-agency interoperability in highly unstable environments such as natural disasters, corporate failures and government-level crisis management scenarios. So that's the official bio. David has been a prolific educator in crisis management and security management, and it is my pleasure to sit down and speak with him on a variety of topics related to the current environment. Please enjoy this conversation with Dr. David Rubens. David, thank you for joining us on the Presilience podcast.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Now, David, for those that don't know much about your history, we've given you a brief introduction in the show notes, but just quickly walk us through a 2-minute snapshot of your career. And then we'll talk a little bit about the CSyRM as well, just for context before we dive into the conversation.
2 minutes. Do you know who I am, Joe? 2 minutes? 2 minutes?
I can give you 2.5.
So basically, I am what is called a security bloke. That's what I do. I do security. Started out in 1981. It's a long time ago, before many of your people were born. And it does not seem very long ago to me. It does not seem very long ago to me. And I was very lucky. I was trained by some of the best teams in the world and had some decent jobs. And then from about 1991, I was back in the UK and I set up my own consultancy. In those days, nobody really knew what they were doing. I mean, whether on the corporate side, I started out like so many people, doing self-defense and stuff for librarians and for teachers, hospitals. Then I got involved in door supervisor training, the licensing. I was on the very, very first list in the UK, on the very first approved trainers list in, I think, October 1992. And I built that up, then got into close protection, both running operations and running training programs. 2006, to cut a long story short, 2006 did my master's degree as a mature student. And that changed everything. And it changed the way I conceptualized it and the way I articulated it. And then I started teaching on various master's level programs around the world. And then I got into a doctorate. And Alison Wakefield, who many people may know, she's very famous, head of the chairman of the Security Institute, very well known as an academic, got me completely drunk in the Special Forces Club till 4 o'clock in the morning. And next morning, I literally had an email saying, "Congratulations, David, welcome to the doctorate program. Please send a check." And I go, "What?" And it was life-changing. So I completed my doctorate in 2015. And that just takes it to a whole new level. And so what we have now is I have two organizations, Deltar Training, which does training programs mainly at the strategic and corporate, high-level corporate level. Though we do some lower-level stuff as well. And I have the ISR, the Institute of Strategic Risk Management, but as you know, in the year and a half it's been going, almost 2 years now, has really created a place for itself in the global risk management environment. As an organization, our aim and our objective, our mission statement is to create a space where academics, policymakers, and practitioners can come together. And I think we've achieved that. So that's really what I do. I see myself as a connector between academia and practitioner practice and policy. The University of Portsmouth, where I did my doctorate, didn't create this concept, but developed this concept of pracademic. So usually when you do a doctorate, you start out, you do a doctorate, a PhD when you're 25 years old. For this program, the professional doctorate, you come in when you're 40, 50 years old. You're 2/3 of your way through your career. You have a lifetime of experience. And then you put doctorate level research over that to try and create an understanding of methodologies and structures, etc., etc. And based on that, you should have respect both in the practitioner world, who recognize you as an effective practitioner, but also in the academic world, that academics recognize you as a genuine researcher and thought developer. So that's what I do.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And ever since I first heard you describe the term pracademic, and really what the mission of the ISRM was, I was enthralled with this idea. It's such a common sense idea to bring together high-level practitioners, academics, and policymakers into one melting pot, hopefully sans egos, to be able to learn from each other and to come up with to create solutions to problems. And I think one of the things you said in a conversation that we had was that oftentimes we have high-level practitioners who know what to do, but they don't know why they know how to do it. And they don't know how to explain it to someone who hasn't got 30 years of experience. Yeah. And they don't necessarily have a conceptual understanding of the principles behind what they're doing. They just know that it works. And they'll make the right decisions, but they don't know how to scale that. And then you've got academics who might know everything in a theoretical lens, but put them in the coalface and they won't know how to make a decision. And then you've got policymakers who often have no experience or knowledge and still have to make a decision. Yeah. And I think putting all those people in the same room to learn from each other will hopefully, and I think we've already seen the fruits of this in the last 2 years of the ISRM. We're seeing tremendous uptake and interest. Probably the last thing I just want to ask you about the ISRM for listeners' sake, the use of the word strategic risk management as opposed to security risk management or safety risk management or just risk management. What was the rationale behind the word strategic? Because I know nothing's by accident.
No, nothing is by accident. It was important to us. And the reason is because in my experience, the vast majority of people who claim they're talking about strategic risk management are not. They're talking about large-scale tactical risk management. And they're saying, well, we have tactical risk management, we know how to do. And then we have more organizations, and we have more radios, and we have bigger control room. And no, that's not strategic, that's large-scale tactical. And it seems to me that there's a category error there, a category error of perspective. And so what I've done in my life, I mean, I was very lucky because that's why I started through my academic career, which basically started in 2004, 2006. I then spent a year as a visiting lecturer at the UK Defence Academy, or Cranfield University, on their strategic leadership program, their master's degree program. But I got involved in strategic management of complex organization operations. And it was clear that, and not just from there, that it's really about, they were talking about operational tactical management, not strategic management. And so it seems to me that if we look at crisis management in general, one of the reasons it fails is because there's a category error. People just do not understand what a 21st century crisis looks like. And therefore, when a crisis does happen, like coronavirus, they go, I didn't think it was going to be like that, mate. And therefore, you have a category error because your job is. Now, if you look at everything, I'm actually having an incredibly interesting conversation at the moment with Professor Kiyoshi Kurokawa from Japan, who was the head of the government inquiry into Fukushima. And what they're saying is, what happened in Fukushima was not unknown. I mean, there was warnings coming at every level, internationally, from the agencies, from the operators, it was known. And political decisions were made to ignore that advice. Influenza pandemic was #1 on the UK government's risk register. I don't know if you've seen these in my presentations, but in 2017, the National Risk Register, top right-hand corner on its own was the influenza pandemic. And then when coronavirus came down, the government says, well, we weren't ready for an influenza pandemic. We're ready for an influenza pandemic. We weren't ready for a COVID pandemic. And I'm thinking, well, COVID doesn't read your plans and do what you want it to do. You've got to be ready. And so usually the reason that people get into trouble, and this is, we spoke before offline about, what lessons can corporate and commercial leaders, business leaders look at it. It's about understanding what you're looking at. It's about seeing patterns. It's sense making, academic sense. The academic people talk about sense making, pattern seeing. But the more that you can do, the richer the data you can gather from the environment you're operating, and the richer the picture that you can build from that, then that doesn't just give you a three-dimensional picture of the environment you're operating in, but it gives you a four-dimensional, because you can then project forward in time. And whether you're working on a close protection unit where you're trying to look 7 seconds, if you're in close protection, you can see 7 seconds into the future, you shouldn't get into trouble. In crisis management, if you can see 3 weeks, 6 weeks into the future, you shouldn't get into trouble. And the question is, does this have impact? Is this something we can do with that? And if so, can you demonstrate it? And the answer is yes, we can, because we can look at the countries of Southeast Asia, of Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, all of whom went through SARS in 2003. And because they'd been through SARS in 2003, they had an understanding of pattern making. They could sense making. They could see this coming. They had an emotional readiness to engage with it. They had a range of options they could look at. Whereas in countries, for example, for Western Europe, I'm not even talking about America, which is a completely different outlier example. But in Western Europe, where there is strong governance and awareness of this and a desire to do things properly, completely misunderstood it. Why? Because they hadn't been through it before. They didn't recognize the patterns. And because they didn't recognize the patterns, they didn't have, it wasn't the technical, they were lacking the technical decision-making capability. But you can give people that, you can supply that. What they lacked was the emotional readiness to make decisions. That was the hard part. The emotional readiness to accept that this is not going to or will go away. And you can't ignore it. You can't pretend it's not happening. Because every day in this sort of environment that you pretend it's not happening, it's getting worse. It's not static, it's not waiting for you. And so the timeliness of your decisions, the sense of urgency to make a decision when you do not know what's going on. This is the whole thing about it. This is crisis management decision making. When you do not know, when you do not have the data, when you do not know a clear understanding of how things are developing, but you still have the need to make decisions. That's part of the whole package there.
Yeah, I think we've there's so much we could unpack about what you just said in the last couple of minutes there, about really be able to make that decision early and have the emotional readiness to make an early decision. Because with something like a pandemic, the exponential growth means that if you make a decision 2 weeks late, it's a completely different situation. And I mean, we started seeing these cases popping up at the end of 2019. That it was on the radar. It was being monitored in early January at the very latest, and yet it feels like no measures were actually taken until it landed.
Yes, it's true. And of course, the thing about it is there's one of my heroes. Anybody who does, I like to throw academic stuff in. If anybody likes, I throw academic stuff in. If anybody's interested, we have a library at the ISRM, open access. Anybody can visit there. All that stuff's there. There's a guy called Patrick Lagardec, a very, very well-known French conceptualist. But he talks the inconceivable and unthinkable, the new paradigm of the inconceivable and the unthinkable. This was not inconceivable and unthinkable. That's a paradigm error. That's the category error. We've had major global pandemic threats or fears every 2 years since, for the last 20 years. We had SARS, we had MERS, we had H1N1, we had swine flu, avian flu, Zika. Mate, how many warnings do you want? Seriously. And for me, we have what's called the ISRM has a twice, as you know, it's twice a week campfire. We just basically open up a webinar and anybody can just dial in and we have a chat, get to know each other. We've been doing that about 4 months now, so we have a real longitudinal study about that twice a week. But I think on the third comment on the very, very first day was, where is the global leadership? Where is the global leadership? This is a global problem. Where is the United Nations? Where's the EU? Where's the G8? Where's the G20? The World Health Organization was the only one who were trying to get involved with it. Of course, they get slapped down by the Americans. But we have seen none integrated global trans-jurisdictional, transboundary approaches. Switzerland is doing it different than Germany. Sweden's doing it different than Norway. I'm sure the Victoria is doing it different than Queensland. What makes you think this stops at the border? You can't. And so these are the lessons that we should be learning now. The greatest, as I often say, the greatest gift to a crisis or to a risk manager is a near miss. The near miss is God's way of saying, I'm giving you a chance. And we've had many near misses. in my opinion, as we've discussed, repeatedly offline, I mean, in multiple forums, I do not think this is a big one. Anybody who claims this is a big one is just getting it wrong. This is a near miss. This is an opportunity for us to say, okay, we got away with it. We got away with another one. Of course, it doesn't come for free. There's a fact, there's significant impact, but this is not the big one. My fear is, and I've heard senior people say this, is it's okay, next time we have a pandemic, we will be ready. But nobody says a pandemic will be the next one. The next one will be something else. So, for example, one of the significant impacts of the pandemic is this work from home. And working from home is the new. I've been speaking to people on a daily basis who are saying, do we need 200 people in our head office? I don't think we do. Do we have to pay for all those chairs and all those? No, we don't. And so you have work from home, which is fantastic. What happens if the next crisis is satellite failure and all our comms go out?
Yeah, all of a sudden we don't have any workspaces left for people to come back to.
We don't have any workspace, we don't have any communications, it all goes down. So what we tend to do is we tend to look at whatever the last crisis was and say, well, let's get ready for that. But of course, the thing about a crisis is you shouldn't be having a crisis twice in a row. You have a crisis because you do not understand. If you understand, it should not be a crisis. And that is why the countries in Southeast Asia that went through SARS, they're not having a crisis, they're having a major incident. Whereas the countries in Europe are having a crisis. What's happening in America is a catastrophe. I mean, and I think we haven't even started to see that. The numbers there, I mean, it is just unbelievable. But let's leave that alone. But what I've learned from COVID-19 coronaviruses, but I've always said it, that you do not manage a crisis. You survive a crisis. You manage the after effect. But I now understand that part of crisis management is downgrading a potential crisis event to a major incident. It's still high impact, it's still significant, it's still very challenging, but it is rational. And a crisis in academic terms, it comes under Little and Webber's idea about a wicked problem. A crisis, as we see it at the moment, is a wicked problem. It is a non-rational problem. And if we can downgrade it from a non-rational problem to a major incident, which is a rational problem, which we can engage with, which we can sort of bring policies to bear, etc., which we can influence, and we can move the dial, the needle on the dial, then I think we've done something significant and impressive and valuable. And I think we have an example within the Southeast Asian countries of how they manage that.
Yeah, that's a really great point there. I think it's...
Joe, I might just say, that's why people love being interviewed by you. Because other people say to me, well, David, I'm not sure I agree with you. But if you say that, just to say, that's why people love being interviewed, my friend.
Well, what was the terminology? Interesting theory.
It's also there, yeah. Good. That's an in-joke. For anybody who's been on any of my courses will understand the in-joke there.
I think we need more communication. That's the other in-joke from that class. I was just going to say, I think that the idea of crisis being non-rational, I think too often we put so much weight on the wording, and we don't realize that if we're in control of the levers and we know which button does what, we're not really in a crisis anymore. Like we are in control. It might be a really ordinary couple of months, but it's not a crisis anymore. And I think as soon as we can start labeling the levers so that we at least know what we've got to press to get a somewhat predictable result, then we can start to really control this. And I think what you're saying is spot on with Southeast Asia. They've been through it. They're emotionally ready for it. In a way, their societies were more geared to take authoritarian, to let the governments tell them what they have to do in the short term. The countries where they haven't quite had that willingness to follow direction have not fared quite as well. But I think that's possibly one of the learnings I know you're going to get to for business here in terms of being able to control crisis, whether it be COVID, whether it be communications failure, whether it be natural disasters. As you know, we started the year with Iran shooting down passenger planes, which seems like forever ago, and then we had half our country on fire here in Australia.
Exactly.
And then we had floods, and then we had destructive hailstorm, and then we had COVID, and now we've got everything that's happening in the United States as well. So if any one of those things overlaps with each other, it becomes a massive issue. And any one of those things on their own is a disruption. So looking at the lessons that we should be learning from this to be ready for the next one, whether it's a pandemic or something completely else, what do you think those lessons are, though, especially for business leaders? What lessons they need to take from this?
I think, well, the first lesson is very simple, Joe. I think you probably agree with me. You need a consultant, preferably one with a doctorate. It's an interesting point, isn't it? Because if it was so easy to learn lessons, why the hell, the question is always, why the hell did we not, there's nothing here that's unknown. There's nothing here that is, coming. It's not Godzilla and King Kong coming off a satellite from Mars. This is basic stuff. And one of the points that I've been making, I know that you and Dr. Gabriel Snyder have been making in Australia, is that if you understand this stuff, it makes sense. It is not random. One of the phrases I've been using recently is, crises are chaotic and complex, but they're not random. They're not shapeless. So I think one of the things is it really is about categorization. The situation you described about the levers, and it may be a tough couple of months, but that does make it a crisis. I think it's a category error. And I know that when I run my open courses, but also when I work with organizations, one of the things that happens very, very quick in the conversation is they say, you know what, we need to go back and look at our risk register, because what we're putting in the crisis corner, that's not a crisis, that's a major incident. And so what we've done is, and organizations do, they always try and find a solution for which they have they try and find a problem for which they have a solution. And if they don't have solutions, or if the solutions are difficult or messy, they tend to push that to the side.
So just to cut in there, do you think that sometimes that crisis label is assigned just to absolve themselves of responsibility to being able to manage it?
Absolutely.
It's like everything being a black swan. It's like, well, COVID was a black swan. Even Peleva's come out and said, no, it's not.
It's not black swan.
It's not a black swan. But if you call it a black swan, you can say, well, I couldn't possibly have been expected to be prepared for that. Well, no, because we knew it was coming. We didn't know when.
You're absolutely right. We actually did a webinar just exactly on that. I was getting so angry with people. I mean, you have Michelle Booker's book on the grey rhino. But you're absolutely right. It's not black swan. It's not a black swan event. And the whole thing about black swan events is they are completely rare. People who do talk about black swan, in my opinion, completely misunderstand what it's about. But let's leave that to the side. You're right. It does absolve you of responsibility. There's nothing you can do about it. And I think what you say, what does it come down to? To go back to your point about what lessons can organizations learn and leaders learn. The first is to accept the responsibility of doing this properly. You have to take it seriously, just like you would have any other aspect of your organization. This has to be central to what you do. It's not something you have as a subsection of 0.7 on your quarterly review. It is absolutely central to what you do. On the other hand, if we're to claim that, and I've been having this conversation for 25 years, that we belong in the C-suite, why are we not influencing? And the question is, we need to belong there. We need to be accepted there. And one of the problems we have is that, we go back to this question of, are we a profession? What do we bring to the table? Well, to have a policeman with 30 years experience, or a colonel who was from the right regiment, who was doing logistics in Kandahar for 2 years, that doesn't make you a corporate leader, And so we need to, if we're going to be in the boardroom, which is where I believe we should be, in the C-suite and influencing, we need to be as good as their tax advisors. Look at their tax advisors. Look at their marketing people. See how good they are. See how they put their point across. See what they bring to the table. And we need to do that. And one of the problems we have is, to just go slightly from a sidetrack, is this idea of professional. Are we a profession? And often we're not. Often we're people who are just telling stories. Or we can say, well, this is what I did here and this is what I did there. But that's not the same thing. And to go back to almost your opening point about this balance between the intuitive decision maker based on 30 years experience and the academic who knows the theory but has never stood in a river at 3 o'clock in the morning. The point that I make, and what we're trying to do with the ISRM and with Deltar, is that if you take that intuitive decision making and you want to have impact on your organization, you need methodology. Methodology is what takes intuitive personal decision making based on 30 years experience and creates organizational capability. And that's what I think we need to do. I was at a fantastic conference in January in Delhi at the Observer Research Foundation. It was a global conference of leaders from all over the world. I was very honored to be there. But they had the plenary session. They had all these guys up on, they had CSyP from Afghanistan. They had the ex-Prime Minister of Australia. I'm not even going to say, I remember who it was. Ex-Prime Minister of Canada, etc., etc. And they said, well, what are the issues you want to deal with? They said, well, we need to have a policy on climate change. We need to have a policy on climate change. I'm thinking, you've had policies on climate change for 30 years. What you need to do, if you're the expert sitting on that stage, you need to bring us a methodology. What is the methodology? We don't need another group of people sitting in a room for 2 years and then deciding nothing. What we need is somebody to say, this is how we do it. And what I'm finding very interesting, certainly before COVID-19 came in, we were getting involved on the outskirts of that conversation with a number of organizations. But what was very interesting is that there was a real trend coming through, and that was, if you want to affect those sorts of things, climate change, not climate change, but the impact climate change has on us, pollution, urbanization, technology, etc., etc. The natural level of input engagement is at the cities. It's not at the countries. Because you can actually get people to listen to you in cities very, very quickly. You can actually get changes made in cities pretty damn quickly, and you can have impact and influence at cities very, very quickly. At countries, you can't do that. And so what I think is happening more and more is we're seeing actually at the city level, ownership being taken at the city level. We see it in America where there's pushback against federal policies. I don't know how it is in Australia. I imagine that there's a similar sort of, given your national state and federal state and city level sort of integrated management systems, I imagine there's similar issues. But if it hadn't been for COVID, we were actually setting up a series of global roadshows based around influencing city management, and it was getting some decent response there. So to go back to your long way around, to the question, what is it that we can do? We can do stuff. But it doesn't have to be. It's not magic and it's not voodoo. A lot of it is pretty damn. Get your basics right. Get the simple stuff right. If you don't get that right, then there's no magic dust which will save you. Further down the line. Have a sensitivity to the risk environment you're operating in. Be emotionally aware of what's happening around you. Be prepared to discuss it. If, as an organization, you tend to ignore situations, not have open conversations, don't trust people to bring you problems, then when something comes up on the horizon, that's exactly what's going to happen. So there's nothing else. It is one of the phrases that I use a lot when I'm having my first introduction to organizations is at the C-suite level, the question is not what do we need to do and how are we going to do it. That's not a C-suite level. That is a second level thing. The C-suite level question is, what sort of organization do we think we need to become in 21st century risk environment? What does a risk-sensitive, crisis-ready organization look like? And if I can just go on for a bit longer, Joe, I'm quite up. I know if you're happy to just let me run, I'll run. But it comes down to one of the words that's been used is resilience. Resilience is a word that we've all used. And then you look around in COVID-19 and you go, well, what happened? All these global consultancies, selling you resilience for millions of dollars a year. What the hell happened there? Ask your money back, my friend. Because. But the thing about resilience,
I would argue the injury's not over yet, so we can't see how resilient we've been.
Exactly. But I know that you and Dr. Gabriel Snyder, are pushing Presilience, and it's a brilliant, and we're working together on that. We're creating a regulated program out of that, which I'm very happy and proud to be part of. And I think it's a very significant development. Sometimes you get a phrase and it just gets you. And for me, Presilience does that. You talk about Presilience and just yeah, I get that. I don't even know what it is, but yeah, that makes sense to me. But the thing about resilience, let's talk about Presilience afterwards, but resilience, I think people misunderstand resilience. Resilience is not about recovering faster. It's about preparing better. Because if you see resilience as a post-event recovery process, you may make it, you may not make it, but it's probably not in your hands. But for me, genuine resilience is not about surviving, it's about thriving. It's about understanding the risk environment. And it's like saying, the example we give in a swamp, which goes from dry to wet to flooded to salt watered. And when it goes from flooded to dry, the animals which were in the water are now on the land. They don't survive. They thrive. This is just what they do. And it seems to me that if we're going to describe, the next 15 years of our business lives, most of us, going to be around another 15 years, please God, it's going to be a crisis environment. These are new crises. We look at COVID, but all of the other crises which you mentioned haven't gone away. We're seeing dust storms coming off the Sahara. We're seeing heat waves. We're seeing flooding. We're seeing cities without water. We're seeing urbanization. We're seeing pollution. And then you you see bushfires, you see drought. We had this conversation. I remember we had this conversation in Australia, Joe, when I was there with you, I think in September, October last year. And they had the droughts and the drought management program. And I said, the problem here is it's not about water management because Australia is dry. You have water management if you have not enough water, but if you don't have water, then it is a different category of problems. And it seems to me Australia almost as a continent is drying up. So what does that mean for every other aspect of it? So the short answer after a very long answer is get your stuff right. Seriously, get your stuff right. It's not magic. It's not voodoo. There's this process management to a large degree, and it's doable.
One thing I've been hammering on about to anyone who will listen, and I'm sure you'll probably agree, is I've been telling people don't be in a hurry to get back to how things were, because that's how we ended up hurting so bad right now. And I think it's a human reaction. We've been destabilized. We've been unsettled. Everything's been turned on its head. Most people didn't see it coming, especially if you're not in the field. You didn't see any of this coming until you went to buy toilet paper and there wasn't any. And people are in a hurry to get their lives back to what they knew. And I think that could be potentially disastrous if we don't stop and see what have we done without. We mentioned the work from home as an example. I mean, what have we done without that we thought we had to have before? Have we flattened our chain of command? Have we improved our decision-making networks? Are we having less pointless meetings? Are we having more pointless meetings? There's an argument. Zoom fatigue is now a term that will probably be included in a dictionary next year.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot we can take away from this, and there's no reason why 2021 has to look like 2019. And I think it shouldn't if we're going to make the most out of this ordeal that we've all been through.
I think you're absolutely right, but transitions always have impacts. Transitions do not come for free. And so if we are to do that, we've got to make sure we don't leave people behind. And I think that's one of the, from another perspective, that's one of the significant issues that we've seen here is, this concept of a war on coronavirus. It's what people have to pay the price. If you look at we had this discussion on our campfire a couple of weeks ago about women leaders, female leaders, and why they seem to be better at this. And one of the things we sort of came out with was the fact that most male leaders talk about the war on coronavirus. And, we've got to defeat it. And most female leaders say, we're in trouble, we've got to look after our people. That's our job, is to look after our people because we're in trouble. And that is a completely different aspect, a completely and utterly different aspect to it. So I think that I think we should be really concentrating on how do we recover forward, not recover back. We don't want to go back to 2019, which at the time was seen as completely dysfunctional. Cities were dysfunctional, systems were dysfunctional, data was dysfunctional, everything was dysfunctional. So why do you want to go back to that? But you're right, it does naturally have that's what we go back to. I would like to believe that we can learn a lot. So, for example, one of the major problems last year was global pollution. We have seen that if you stop doing bad things for 4 weeks, the system starts recovering incredibly. You talk about the resilience, the global Gaia ecosphere. If we just stop doing bad things to it, we'll recover in weeks. In weeks, rivers come back, forests come back, urban greenery comes back. So the first thing is stop doing stupid stuff. Okay, that's the first thing. Stop doing stupid stuff. Don't burn the Amazon. That's bad. Okay. Do not put the Arctic in charge of oil and gas executives. That's bad. Okay, don't do that. And if you do that, then what the hell do you think is going to happen to you? Okay. But what we've seen is that we are only 2 degrees away from some really good stuff. We don't have to have a 90-degree, 180-degree turn. If we just change what we do by 2-3 degrees, that has impact. One of the things that I talk about when I'm working with organizations is, do not talk about radical change. No organization likes radical change. Radical change is by its very nature disruptive and destructive, and you get pushback. What you want is incremental change that has a radical impact. And it seems to me that if one of the lessons that COVID-19 has taught us is, if we change our social activity within completely acceptable limits, the impact on all of those problems, the environmental problems, the way we engage with the world we live in, will have significant impact and significant improvement. But I do feel, I agree with you absolutely, Joe, that we have an opportunity to really move forward, but we really, really have to be aware of the transition process. It's very easy to think about Q3, Q4, 21. What about the people, we've had this discussion, many of the people, you, me, and people similar to us, we're not doing too badly out of COVID-19. We're okay. To live on the fifth floor of a block of flats with a 2-bedroom apartment with 2 children under the age of 5 and the lift doesn't work, that's not funny, And that's and you've got no money and you've got no work. And I think one of the things that we identified very, very quickly in the coronavirus campfires was the impact on social well-being and mental health. And I think that's going to have a long-term impact. And what I think is one of the points I've made very publicly during COVID-19 is that once you survive that initial shock and you start getting back on your feet, as a responsible agency, whether it's an agency, a ministry, a corporation, or a government, you basically, from a crisis management perspective, only have 2 responsibilities there, 2 tasks. The first is management of resource deployment. How do you get stuff to where it needs to be, when it needs to be, in the necessary levels? And that's personal protection equipment or toilet paper, it doesn't matter. That's what we're talking about. And the second is look after your people. That's it. You've got to look after your people. And we see that in every crisis situation. And in my opinion, certainly speaking from a UK perspective, you said that, that there are authoritarian regimes, certainly in Southeast Asia. We've seen decisions made by governments across Europe, across the world, unprecedented, absolutely. And there's nothing in 1,000 years of history that says that the government can say, you cannot leave your house for 3 months and you're going to stick to it. And you can't go to work and you can't, and people took it within 2 days. Everybody was basically saying, more or less. I'm not saying not everybody, but more or less, you had acceptance of the government's right to tell you to do that. And people more or less fitted in with it. So I think that, there is that feeling of, well, okay, if we need to do it, let's get on and do it. But then you come to the word which I don't believe we've used yet, trust. I don't think we've mentioned that word yet. And that's where it comes trust. You've got to trust that the government knows what it's doing, or the leaders know what they're doing. And I think that we're now moving to the stage, you mentioned the second peak. I think that could be a problem. Now, again, we identified that very early on, that, as you cannot have a release from lockdown without a second peak. It's impossible. It's going to come. And therefore, you have to have a very slow release. But then, of course, as the stuff you alluded to, you've got to get the economy working. You've got to get people back to work. And so that fine balance is difficult. There are no solutions. There are options. There's directions of travel. There are strategies. But anybody who says they know how to do this just doesn't understand the nature of the beast.
Well, that's right, isn't it? I mean, it's fine to say, well, we need to get the economy going, and it's only going to be the elderly or those that are already sick that are likely to die. So, well, okay, who's volunteering their mother? Which one of you is going to volunteer your relatives? Yeah. It's like, well, then you put a personal face on it, and all of a sudden it doesn't sound like such an easy decision to make anymore. It's fine when it's other people that I don't know that are dying. But this is the burden of leadership, isn't it? You've got to make the decisions that other people don't want to make. And
it is, but also you're right. It is the burden of leadership. But of course, those are political decisions. That's why you spent 30 years of your life trying to get that job. They say we will follow the science, right? The science can indicate, but the science doesn't give you answers. The science can help you.
The science isn't going to re-elect you either. The science isn't voting for you in 4 years' time.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And even the scientists will say, well, how do we do lockdown when we don't know? I mean, we can give you the data when we do it, but there is no correct answer of how you do this stuff. So again, very, very, very tough things. But I think trust, and there's certain people, just in obviously in New Zealand, there's an Angela Merkel to a certain extent in Germany. But the idea that you actually trust your leaders, I tell you, some of the people are getting it right in the corporates. I think that's one of the big differentials that's going to happen. The phrase that we use is the long recovery. This is not the 3-week recovery. You still listen to governments and they're still talking about 2 weeks. Is it going to be the 4th of July or the 3rd of September? You say, mate, we're talking about a 3 to 5 to 10 year recovery, not 1 week here or 1 week there. But when we go into that long recovery and the world stabilizes and we have a new normal to a certain extent, and the opportunities start coming out because the opportunities will be there, I think there'll be a genuine differentiation between those organizations that genuinely looked after their people and those that didn't. And I think that will be seen to be an effective way of dealing with stuff like that. Look after your people and good things will happen to you. I'm absolutely convinced of that.
It's a great note to wind things up on there, David. For those that want to know more about the ISRM or they want to undertake, are you still doing the online training with Emirates? Is that still happening?
Yes, we did that with Emirates. We're about to start week 9 next week.
Wow.
We have free training programs, webinar free for anybody. Over 4,000 people on that. Completely talked about COVID opportunities I look for. Going very well. Thank you for that. And yes, they're still happening.
Excellent. All right, we'll put the links in the show notes for anyone who wants to take advantage of some free training with Dr. David Rubens. Also put a link to the ISRM at the isrm.org. Highly recommend you join up with the ISRM if you want to be involved in really what I think, and I'm a little bit biased because I'm a member, but I think is the next frontier in risk management. Really, it has to be the way forward. It has to be. We've got to all get on the same page, start singing from the same song sheet and help each other out, or else there's no way forward other than that. David, thank you very much for your time this morning, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
All the best to you. Thanks a lot, Joe. All the best. Thank you.
Thank you once again to Dr. David Rubens for tremendous insight from his career in security risk management and crisis management. Certainly some very actionable takeaways in that particular interview. If you're interested in finding out more about the Institute of Strategic Risk Management and becoming a member, which I highly encourage you to do, head over to www.theisrm.org. That's theisrm.org. There are chapters all over the world, so wherever you're listening to this, there is a community there waiting for you to offer your expertise and to share insights. Thank you for listening to this episode. Until next time, stay resilient.